I don't even know how to start this without sounding like a complete jerk, but here goes. I'm 27M, working in IT, and for the past 6 years, my sister Jess, 25F, has been living with me. I guess you could say it was one of those situations where I wanted to do the right thing as the older brother, and it just spiraled from there. A bit of context, Jess got pregnant when she was 19. I don't need to go into all the details, but it wasn't a good situation. She didn't have much support at the time, and our mom, who raised us both as a single parent, wasn't in the best place financially or emotionally to help her either. So, being the big brother, I said come stay with me. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. I had just bought a small house, nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom, 1-bath kind of place, but it was mine. I had saved up for years to get that house, and I was proud of it. It felt like a solid foundation, you know? Jess was only supposed to stay for a few months while she got her life sorted out. I even helped with the baby at night sometimes and made space for her to feel comfortable. The thing is, a few months turned into a year, then another year, then 6 years. To be fair, Jess wasn't completely useless, she kept her area of the house clean mostly, and, when her first kid got older, she helped with little things like groceries or cleaning up the shared spaces. But she never paid rent. Not once. I didn't ask her to either, because at first, I didn't want to be that guy. I felt bad asking her for money when I knew she was struggling as a single mom. Over the years, though, things got comfortable for her. She had a second kid while living here. Don't ask me about the dad situation because that's a whole other story, and suddenly what started as a place to crash became her entire life. My house was her house, and her boys, my nephews, grew up thinking of it as their home. I guess part of me let it go on because I felt like I owed her something. Jess and I didn't have the easiest childhood. Our mom did her best, but we grew up pretty broke, and I always promised myself I'd be better, that I'd be the kind of guy who helped his family when they needed it. And honestly, I like my nephews, they're good kids, even if they're loud as hell and constantly making messes in the yard. Then about 2 years ago, I met Amy, 26F. She's now my wife, and honestly, she's amazing. We clicked right away, and she's been nothing but understanding about the whole Jess situation. For the first couple of years, Amy didn't say much about my sister living here. She'd make little comments sometimes, like, when do you think Jess will get her own place, but she was patient because she knew it was complicated. Things started to change when Amy moved in last year. I mean, I get it, it's not easy to move into a house where another woman and her 2 kids are already living. Jess and Amy were civil at first, but there was always this unspoken tension. Amy felt like she couldn't make the house hers because Jess had already staked out her little territory. Here's where things started to go sideways. Amy has always been into gardening, it's her thing. She grew up helping her grandmother in the garden and has always talked about how much peace it brings her. For the last year since moving in, she's been itching to start her own little project. One night a few weeks ago, after dinner, we were sitting around talking about the house. Amy brought up how she wanted to tear up part of the front yard and plant a garden that would bloom in the spring. She already had this whole vision, flowers, some small shrubs, and even a little bench where we could sit together. Honestly, it sounded nice. Our yard is nothing special, just grass and a couple of sad bushes. I figured a garden would make the place look better, and since Amy was so excited about it, I didn't see a reason to say no. We talked about hiring contractors to do the initial work, tearing up the grass, prepping the soil, and laying out the space. Amy wanted to take a few days off work to supervise and make sure it was done exactly how she pictured it. I thought it was a solid plan and told her to go for it. Now here's the thing, in hindsight, I totally get where I screwed up. I should have told Jess about the plan. I mean, yes, it's my house, and I don't technically owe her an explanation for what I do with it, but at the same time, Jess has been living here for 6 years, and her kids do play in that part of the yard all the time. Even if it's not her space in the legal sense, it's been a part of her daily routine for so long that I probably should have given her a heads up. The problem is that Amy and I have such weird schedules that we barely saw Jess that week. She's usually around during the day when I'm at work, and by the time I get home, the boys are in bed and Jess is winding down. I didn't think it was urgent to mention the garden because I honestly thought she wouldn't care that much. Looking back, that was a dumb assumption. So fast forward to the day the contractors were scheduled to come. Amy had taken the day off to handle it, I was at work like usual, and I had no idea what was about to go down. The contractors showed up bright and early and started ripping up the front yard. Amy was out there with them, making sure everything was being done right. From what Amy told me later, it was fine at first. She said good morning to Jess, who barely looked at her, and then went about her business. But then Jess noticed what was actually happening. She saw the workers tearing up the grass where her kids play every day, and apparently, she lost it. Amy told me the yelling started out of nowhere. Jess came storming out of the house in her pajamas, demanding to know what was going on. She accused Amy of ruining the yard and taking away the only place her kids have to play. Amy tried to explain that she and I had already discussed it, but Jess wasn't having it. From what Amy described, Jess was screaming. She started yelling at the contractors to stop their work and told them they didn't have permission to touch anything. Amy stepped in and said, "Actually, you don't get to make that call. This is our house." Jess fired back with something like, "I've lived here for 6 years, it's my home too, and you don't get to come in here and tear it apart." At that point, things got really out of hand. Apparently our neighbor Karen, 40 SF, heard the yelling and decided to insert herself into the situation. Karen and Jess are pretty friendly, her kids play with my nephews sometimes, and they've bonded over being single moms. From what Amy told me later, Karen came over and immediately took Jess's side, asking Amy what the workers were doing and why Jess didn't know about it. Amy tried to stay calm, but Karen wasn't listening. She ended up calling the police. Yeah, the police. I still can't believe it when I think about it. Karen called 911 and said there were unauthorized workers on the property tearing up the yard. She claimed Amy wasn't allowed to make changes because the owner wasn't home. The cops showed up pretty quickly. I guess in a quiet neighborhood like ours they have nothing better to do, and things got even more ridiculous. Amy tried to explain that she did have permission because this is her home too and we're married, but because I wasn't there to confirm anything, the cops told Amy she needed to leave for the night. They let her grab an overnight bag, and then they literally escorted her out of our house. When I found out about all this, I was at work and completely unreachable. I work in a warehouse zone of our IT facility, so I don't have my phone on me during shifts. I didn't even know any of this had happened until I checked my phone on break and saw about a dozen missed calls from Amy. I felt like an absolute idiot. I left work early, jumped in my car, and spent the whole hour-long drive home just trying to process what the hell was happening. When I got home that night, I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. I walked into the house, and the first thing I saw was Jess sitting on the couch, completely calm, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Amy wasn't even there. My wife had been kicked out of her own home, and my sister was acting like she was the victim. "Where's Amy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jess looked up all innocent. "She left," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The cops told her she had to. Her tone set me off immediately. I wasn't yelling yet, but I was close. "Why did you call the police on her, Jess? What the hell is going on here?" That's when she jumped into her story, all defensive. According to her, she had no choice. Amy and the workers were tearing up her kids' play space without telling her, and she had to do something about it. She kept talking about how she's lived here for 6 years and how Amy came in and started changing everything without even respecting her. "You don't get it," Jess said. "This has been my home too for years. You don't just get to rip up the yard without telling me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister, who's lived here rent-free, who I've supported for years, was talking like she had some kind of equal ownership over my house. "Your home," I said. "Jess, this isn't your house. You've been living here because I let you. I've helped you out for years, and you repay me by getting the police involved and having my wife kicked out?" That's when she pulled the victim card. She started crying, talking about how much the yard meant to her kids and how they don't have anywhere else to play. I wasn't unsympathetic, I love my nephews, but the way she handled this was unacceptable. "You screamed at Amy," I said, my voice raising a little now. You embarrassed her in front of the workers, dragged the neighbor into it, and called the police. Who does that? Jess stood up and started yelling back, like she was trying to match my energy. You and Amy didn't even tell me. I had to find out when strangers were digging up the yard. You don't just get to change everything without talking to me first. I've lived here for 6 years, I have a say in this. I stopped. I actually stopped mid-sentence because what she said was so insane to me. You have a say, Jess? You don't pay rent. You don't own this house. You've been living here because I've been helping you out. And then she said it, the line that made my blood boil, I have tenant rights. You can't just do whatever you want anymore. I froze. What did you just say? Jess crossed her arms and said it again, quieter but firmer this time, I have tenant rights. I've lived here for 6 years, you can't just kick me out or change things without notice. Legally, I have rights too. At this point, I had to walk away. I couldn't even look at her. I went outside and sat on the porch, trying to calm down. I could feel my hands shaking, not out of fear but because I was so angry. Amy called me while I was out there, she'd been staying with her sister, and I could hear how upset she was. I can't believe your sister did that to me, she said, her voice cracking. I'm your wife, and the police made me leave our house. Hearing how hurt she was made me even angrier. I'll handle it, I promised her. This is the last straw, Amy. Jess has to go. I went back inside after a while. Jess was still sitting there, acting like nothing had happened. I didn't sugarcoat it this time. You need to move out, I told her. She looked up at me, shocked. What? Kicking me out over a garden? No, I said. I'm kicking you out because of how you treated Amy. I'm kicking you out because you think you have more of a right to this house than my wife does. This is my home, Jess, and you crossed a line. She started crying again, telling me I was being unfair, that she had nowhere to go, that I was choosing Amy over my own sister. And maybe I was, but at that moment, I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her keep disrespecting my wife and acting like she owned the place. I gave her a deadline. You have 60 days to find somewhere else. I'm serious. I'll help you pack, I'll help you find a place, but you're moving out. Jess stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I just stood there for a minute, feeling completely drained. The next day, I called a lawyer to ask about this whole tenant rights thing. I didn't want to get caught off guard if Jess tried to fight me on it. The lawyer said that Jess might technically have some residency rights because she's been living there for so long, but since there's no lease and she's never paid rent, it would be easy enough to evict her, I just needed to give her proper notice in writing. So that's exactly what I did. I wrote up a formal notice, printed it out, and handed it to Jess that evening. You're really doing this, she asked me, tears in her eyes. Yes, I said. It's time, Jess. I felt bad, of course I did. She's my sister, and I love her, but this wasn't just about the yard anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fact that I needed to put my wife first. That night, I texted Amy and told her everything. She came home the next morning, and when I saw how relieved she looked to be back in her own house, I knew I was doing the right thing. I've started the formal eviction process, and I'm not backing down this time. Maybe this makes me a bad brother, but I've reached my limit. We'll update when there are any developments. Update 1, a week has passed since my last post about serving my sister with eviction papers. Things have escalated in ways I didn't expect, but I'm handling it methodically and getting some surprisingly satisfying results. First off, Jess's reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of accepting the reality of the situation, she decided to fight back legally. She actually hired a lawyer, some cheap consultation type who apparently convinced her she had squatters' rights or something similar. Her lawyer sent me this threatening letter claiming that after 6 years of established residence, she had equal rights to the property. What they didn't count on was that I'd already consulted with a real estate attorney who specializes in evictions. My lawyer explained that while Jess does have certain basic tenant protections, her position is extremely weak. Not only has she never paid rent, but we have zero written agreements about her stay. All documentation shows me as the sole owner, and my wife Amy as a legal resident. Even better, my lawyer pointed out that her actions during the garden incident actually work in our favor. It demonstrates a pattern of hostile behavior towards the legal property owners. Remember Karen, the neighbor who called the cops? Well, she's been causing more trouble. She started posting on our neighborhood Facebook group about how I'm throwing a single mother and her children out on the street. She even tried to organize some kind of protest outside our house. But that backfired spectacularly when my lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter, warning that her actions could be considered harassment and interference with legal proceedings. The most interesting development came when Karen suddenly received a visit from the police herself. Turns out, making false reports to law enforcement about unauthorized construction can have consequences. She's now facing potential charges for filing a false police report. Amazing how quickly her tune changed after that. She's been completely silent for the past few days. The neighborhood dynamics have shifted significantly since this all started. Initially, some neighbors seemed to side with Jess, probably because she'd spent years painting herself as a struggling single mother. But after Karen's failed protest attempt and the truth coming out about Jess's financial situation, people have started to see things differently. What really shocked me was discovering that Jess has been working part-time for the past 2 years but constantly claimed she couldn't afford to move out. My lawyer subpoenaed her financial records as part of the eviction process, and it turns out she's been saving quite a bit of money, just not for moving out. She's been taking exotic vacations with her friends while claiming poverty to me. Yesterday, things took another interesting turn when Jess tried to play her final card. Her lawyer contacted me with what they called a settlement offer. They proposed that she would leave peacefully if I paid her $10,000 in relocation assistance. Their argument was that she had contributed to the household through cleaning and maintenance, and deserved compensation for her long-term investment in the property. My lawyer's response was perfect. He sent back a detailed calculation of market rate rent for 6 years, utilities she never contributed to, property tax portions she never paid, maintenance costs I covered alone, and legal fees from the current situation. The total came to well over $100,000. He then offered to generously waive these costs in exchange for her immediate departure. Suddenly, Jess's lawyer seemed a lot less interested in pursuing financial claims. The family's reaction has been evolving throughout this process. Initially, many were torn about the situation, especially our mom. But after seeing the police report from the garden incident and learning about Jess's secret savings, most of them started understanding my position. Our mom actually called Jess to tell her she was out of line. That was a major turning point. Jess didn't expect the family to side with me. Amy has been incredibly supportive through all of this. She's been helping me document everything that happens, and she pointed out that we have security camera footage from the garden incident that clearly shows Jess and Karen's behavior. This has been invaluable for our legal case. On a positive note, Amy's garden project is moving forward, though with a different timeline. We've hired new contractors, the previous ones understandably didn't want to come back, and work will begin as soon as Jess moves out. Amy's been working with a landscape designer to create an even better plan than before. The only part of this that still weighs on me is the kids. They don't understand what's happening, and Jess is definitely using them as emotional leverage. Yesterday, my nephew asked me why we don't love them anymore, which was clearly something he'd heard from his mother. It breaks my heart, but I remind myself that this situation is entirely of Jess's making. The 60-day notice period continues, but my lawyer says we're in an extremely strong position. Jess's attempts to claim tenant rights have actually worked against her. By acknowledging herself as a tenant, she's also acknowledged that I'm her landlord, which gives me more legal authority to evict her. I've noticed Jess starting to pack some things, though she's trying to be subtle about it. I think the reality is finally sinking in, especially now that she's lost the family's sympathy. Her lawyer probably advised her that fighting this would be expensive and futile. We'll update again when there are significant developments. The way things are going, I expect Jess will either leave early to save face or try to stay until the last possible moment out of spite. Either way, we're prepared. After seeing how quickly her previous legal threats crumbled, I doubt she'll push it that far. Update 2, Karen's legal troubles escalated too. The police investigation into her false report concluded, and she's now facing misdemeanor charges. She tried to apologize and get us to drop the charges, but the prosecutor decided to proceed anyway. Apparently, she's done this kind of thing before with other neighbors. The most satisfying development came through our homeowner's insurance company. When they learned about the garden incident and the false police report, they decided to pursue Karen for the increased premiums and legal costs. She ended up having to pay a significant settlement, which we're using to fund an even better garden project than originally planned. 2 weeks before the eviction deadline, Jess made one last desperate attempt. She actually tried to claim adverse possession, arguing that her 6-year residence gave her partial ownership rights. Her new lawyer, the third one she's hired, quickly withdrew that claim when our lawyer presented the extensive documentation of her rent-free status and my consistent assertion of ownership. The family dynamics have completely shifted in our favor. Our cousins helped us discover that Jess had been running a small online business from our house for the past year, something she never mentioned while claiming financial hardship. She'd been using our address for business registration and never reported the income. This information made its way to the appropriate authorities. When moving day finally arrived, we hired professional movers and security to ensure everything went smoothly. Jess tried one last time to cause drama by claiming some of our furniture belonged to her. The movers, who had been briefed by our lawyer, simply referred to our itemized inventory and photographs from when she first moved in, which proved everything was mine. What really sealed her fate was her attempt to damage the house before leaving. She thought she was being clever by doing small things, loosening cabinet handles, putting tiny holes in window screens, that sort of thing. What she didn't realize was that our new security system caught everything on camera. Our lawyer is using this footage to pursue damages, which will likely result in a judgment against her. The kids were the hardest part. On moving day, my nephew left a heartbreaking note saying he'd miss his home. I'm setting up a separate savings account for both kids' future education, something Jess never bothered to do despite her secret income. They may not understand now, but someday they'll know their uncle still cared. Amy's garden project is now in full swing. The contractor started work the day after Jess left, and the transformation is already amazing. We're adding a small play area that the neighborhood kids can use, with supervision, showing everyone that we're not the villains Jess tried to paint us as. The neighborhood's response to the truth has been overwhelming. Several neighbors came forward with stories about Jess's manipulative behavior over the years. One elderly couple revealed she'd been borrowing money from them monthly, claiming it was for the kids' medical expenses. Our lawyer is helping them recover those funds. Karen's final humiliation came during a neighborhood association meeting. When she tried to defend her actions, another neighbor presented evidence of her pattern of interference in other disputes. She's now been removed from the Neighborhood Watch program and banned from community leadership roles. The house feels different now, peaceful, organized, and truly ours for the first time. We've repainted the walls, replaced the carpets Jess had damaged, and finally set up the home office I've always wanted. Amy's garden is becoming a neighborhood showpiece, complete with a sophisticated irrigation system and seasonal flower rotation. The transformation has been so dramatic that a local gardening club has asked to feature it in their annual tour. Our legal victory was more complete than we initially expected. During the final court hearing, Jess's unauthorized business activities became a central issue. The judge was particularly stern about her misuse of our address for business registration and tax purposes. The resulting judgment not only validated our eviction but also included compensation for property damage and legal fees. The judge's closing remarks about the abuse of family goodwill were particularly satisfying. The community's perspective has shifted dramatically. Our next-door neighbors, who initially kept their distance during the conflict, recently hosted a barbecue and publicly apologized for not standing up to Karen's false narrative sooner. They shared similar experiences with both Karen and Jess, revealing a pattern of manipulation we hadn't fully understood before. What's been most surprising is how this experience has actually strengthened some family bonds while severing toxic ones. Our cousins, who helped expose Jess's secret business, have become regular visitors. They've been instrumental in helping us document everything for potential future legal needs and have even contributed to Amy's garden project. Our mom, who struggled with the situation initially, has found peace with the outcome. She recently told me that watching how Amy and I handled everything with dignity and legal propriety helped her understand that sometimes tough love is necessary. She's become a regular visitor now, helping Amy with the garden and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere we've created. Last week, we received an unexpected letter from Jess's older child. He's staying with our aunt for the summer and wrote to apologize for some of the things he'd said during the move. It was clearly written in his own words, without his mother's influence, and it gave us hope that someday we might rebuild that relationship, even if things with Jess remain severed. The restraining orders against both Jess and Karen were granted last month, providing an extra layer of security and peace of mind. The judge was particularly impressed with our detailed documentation and security footage, commenting that it was one of the most well-prepared cases she'd seen. Our lawyer's final report included some interesting statistics. Over 6 years, the total value of rent, utilities, and damages came to nearly $150,000. The judge's final order included a judgment for a significant portion of this amount, though we doubt we'll ever see it. Still, having the judgment on record feels like vindication. Looking back, I realize that enabling Jess's behavior for 6 years was my mistake, but ending it was the right decision. Sometimes doing the right thing means being the bad guy in someone else's story. Amy and I are finally enjoying our home the way we always should have, and the legal protections we've put in place ensure Jess can never pull anything like this again. For anyone in a similar situation, document everything, get a good lawyer, and don't let emotional manipulation override your right to enjoy your own property. The past few months have been challenging, but standing firm was worth it. Our home is finally our own, and the justice served was more satisfying than I ever imagined it could be. Finally, I want to thank this Reddit community. Your support and advice on my previous posts helped me stay strong through this process. The legal suggestions many of you provided were invaluable, and the similar stories you shared helped me realize I wasn't alone in this situation. Special thanks to those who recommended the security cameras, they proved to be crucial evidence. This community's wisdom and support made a real difference in our fight for justice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to help Amy with her new butterfly garden section. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you finally have control of your own space.